Hi, friend, and welcome to the Moms of Tweens and Teens podcast. I am so happy that you are here and listening today. And if you struggle with organization and clutter, if you are like, oh my gosh, there's so much to do, and I don't even know what to do with my to-do list and where to start, if you have a kid or kids that are disorganized and you can't stand looking at their rooms, or if you are looking at other moms and you're like, they seem to have everything together. I go to their home, it's so clean, everything's organized. What's wrong with me? You are going to want to listen to today's episode. My special guest is Laurie Palau, and she is the author of the book Hot Mess, A Practical Guide to Getting Organized. She is the host of the popular weekly podcast, This Organized Life, with over 3 million downloads. And she is the founder of Simply Be Organized, a lifestyle company helping people live simple and work smarter. And I loved this interview because Laurie doesn't just give this how-to. She says it's not about the bins. She gets to the why. And we talk a lot about the Enneagram. And if you have not heard of the Enneagram, you for sure want to listen. And if you have heard of the Enneagram, you already know, oh my gosh, I want to listen to this, because so much of our organization and our clutter has to do with our personality type and what works for us and what doesn't work for us, and having this empathy and understanding of ourselves, but not just ourselves, but also our kids, our spouses. So I loved the perspective she takes. We just go so much deeper in this interview, and I know that you are going to find it as helpful and insightful and transformative as I did talking to Laurie. So let's jump in. Welcome, Laurie, to the show. I am so excited to talk to you. Thank you for coming on.
I am so excited. I get well, you might not know, but whenever someone asks me to come on the show and talk about the Enneagram, I get like an extra little pep in my step. So this is going to be awesome.
Yeah, when I found out that not only do you do organization and clutter, but you connect it to the why and our personalities and our motivations. And I've never had anybody on the show that's talked about how our personality and our motivation play a role in our clutter. I've been thinking about it ever since. I'm like, oh, I think that explains why I struggle in this area. And it's such a great empathy tool. And so many of our listeners don't know what the Enneagram is. And can you start there? Like, how did you get into doing this with organization, clutter? And then how did you connect the Enneagram and come upon the Enneagram? So
Yeah, I'll answer all the questions.
Okay.
So just for all the listeners, first of all, that don't know what the Enneagram is, I'll give a very high level, dumbed down definition of it. So it's a personality typology tool. So if you've ever heard of Myers-Briggs or DISC or Strength Finders or Gretchen Rubin's 4 tendencies, there's all these different explanations for kind of why we do what we do. And what differentiates the Enneagram from other personality typologies is that it looks at your motivation, not just your behavior. So a lot of us, it's like, oh, you're an introvert, you're an extrovert, you're this, you're that, where Enneagram takes it back a layer and it looks at your unconscious motivation. So why we do what we do. So you can have several people that do the same thing, but their reasoning behind it is different. And that always fascinated me. You would think I always say I'm like a fake psychologist, but I'm fascinated by personality types. So I was introduced to the Enneagram. It dates back thousands of years. If you go down an Enneagram rabbit hole, it's not something new. It's just something that in recent years has had a resurgence of popularity, and especially in certain cultures. And I was introduced to it in 2017 when a very popular book came out called The Road Back to You I got no stake in this game, but it gained a lot of interest by people, and I started hearing about it. So I read the book just out of curiosity. And the Enneagram has 9 different personality types, that so each one of them has its own characteristics. And what I liked about it is that it's not static, it's fluid. So essentially, there's a little bit of each one of the like a little bit of all the types in each one of us, but everybody has one dominant type. And when you read it, what really stands out is that it tells you the good and the bad. So it's like you read it and you're like, oh, yes, all these great things. And then you're like, oh, they know that about me. So I found it very fascinating and very telling. And I started just having conversations with people just in my personal life about it. And everybody that would read about it, it was like their mind was blown. They're like, oh my gosh, where has this been all my life? And so I just personally went down this like rabbit hole. I started reading, listening to podcasts. I even went to conferences because I was just very fascinated. And at the time, I had no specific agenda to tie it into the work I was doing. Professionally, I've been a professional organizer for now it's 15 years. And I always looked at kind of the why of clutter. So my approach with organizing always looked at the why. And so when I came across the Enneagram, I was like, huh, this is kind of interesting. And so the more I learned and the more that I kind of got into it, I started saying, well, and there was all these like podcasts and shows and books about Enneagram in the workplace and Enneagram in parenting and Enneagram in relationships. And I was like, well, where's about Enneagram and organization or Enneagram and clutter?
Mhm.
And there wasn't. And there just wasn't information on like out there on that. And I said, well, I can really see based on the work that I had been doing for the past however many years about the different types of clutter that there are definite connection points, and the Enneagram could be an incredible tool that we can use. It's not an excuse and it's not the answer, but it's an incredible tool that we can use to not only understand the people in our lives, but understand ourselves. So I went down the rabbit hole of focus groups and talking to people and interviewing people, and essentially developed a framework that we now use in corporation when we work with clients, and I teach other professional organizers how to use this tool of the Enneagram in a way to understand your clients, understand your spouses, understand yourself, and apply the strategies that work for you. Because we all know that not one size fits all for anything, especially when it comes to organizing.
Yes. And also, organizing is also like the clutter in your brain and what takes you off of what you're trying to accomplish.
Oh, 1,000%.
Yes. And I just want to say to everybody that's listening, I can't remember it. Maybe I discovered the Enneagram like 10 years ago. And I had a friend, she's a spiritual director, and she was very into the Enneagram. And she's like, you have to read about the Enneagram. I'm like, oh, what's the Enneagram? And I just kind of put it to the side. And then when I learned about it, it was such a great empathy tool to understanding not only myself, but understanding my husband, who's an 8, which you're an 8. And I always admired him because he was very direct, very straightforward. He just could cut through all the, clutter of an issue and get right down to the meat of it. But he also is a challenger. And I would say something to him that maybe I didn't like, and he would push back on that and he would challenge that. And he was so direct. After we got married, he was very direct, and I would be like wincing. I would be like, oh, because I'm a 2. And I was like, oh, they might be upset with you that you said that. He never felt like he had to really apologize, although he will apologize. But I would over apologize. And I was like, that explains a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I could see the beauty in his personality in a whole other way. And then I could see what his motivations were and what his weaknesses were, and how he needs to lean more towards the being vulnerable piece. And
Mhm.
I also love it because it helps you understand yourself and where the growth lies.
A
So,
thousand percent.
yeah, I can now see that a big part of it too is we want to help others, and yet we need boundaries. So even with the clutter and connecting these, I'm like, no wonder. Like, I think I like things neat, but I have bags of papers like in my closet. Like, I'll throw it all in a brown paper bag, and then I might not look at it, and it's like, oh my gosh, that bill is overdue. That's how I want it all clean, but it's more out of a relationship. Like, twos are very relational. So I thought, oh, that makes so much sense, that I want everybody to feel good in my home. So I don't want the clutter, but then I let my relationships and taking care of people get in the way of me actually doing those self-care things, which is taking the time to organize myself. So it was fascinating when I think about it. I've got my grandkids living here right now, and my daughter, and we're in a rental, and it's super small. And I feel scattered. And then I started thinking, and I want you to speak to this, maybe that is because I'm so focused on everybody else's needs around me that I've lost myself in this. And I find even working is hard, but it's not just about the space, it's about everybody else's needs around me that takes me off track and away from myself. So, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. There's so much I want to say with based on everything that you said. But yes, I think when it comes to clutter in general, take the Enneagram out of it. The stuff is rarely the problem.
Yeah.
It's really right. The stuff is the result. It's not the root cause of it. And so much of what we judge ourselves on is what we see on the outside. But it's really, like you said, the emotional or the mental clutter or the overscheduling of what I call calendar clutter, all of these other things that lead up to why we feel unsettled. And it's really about how it makes us feel. Like, I have people that I will walk into their home and there are piles of paper and they're calm. It's not a pain point for them. They might be what I call clutter blind, where they don't even see it. And you have other people that it stresses them out. The biggest connection point is where I feel that my biggest aha moment, I will say, is using the thoughts, feelings, and action, which are the three centers of our intelligence, right? We all use three different decision making tools. What do we think? How do we feel? And what do we do? And you hit the nail right on your head when you were talking about you and your husband, how eights are doers, we're action oriented people. And we really don't, for better or worse, and it can be both depending on the situation, necessarily take feelings into account when we're making decisions. We are, what is what is the goal? What do we need to do? How are we going to get there? And it is very action oriented. And then our next line of defense is, what is the process we're going to do? So we go action, then we go thoughts. The last thing on our radar is feelings. Twos are the opposite.
Yeah.
Twos are all about feeling. And so that will pause their ability, not that you can't do things, because obviously you do, but your first response is going to be, how do I feel? How do other people feel? And primarily more, how do other people feel? Because twos are very other focused. And action is least on your totem pole. So when you are thinking about and you use your example of the paper in the closet, that makes perfect sense. It aligns beautifully, because the procrastination piece of it for twos are, I'll get to it later because somebody else needs me, something else is taking priority. So your motivation, for lack of a better word, of procrastination isn't because you're trying to like be lazy. It's, there are other things that are taking precedent. So this goes down the line. And then what happens is it winds up, coming back to bite you, because then you're like, the bill is late, this is late, all these other things, because you by default have put all of these other things to the front, move these other things to the front of the line. Does that make sense?
Oh gosh, it totally makes sense. And I'm just like thinking, gosh, it makes so much sense because he's a doer and he'll be like, even with my business, he'll be like, oh, are you doing this? And are you doing that? And are you doing this? And I totally stresses me out, but it's a beautiful thing because he's thinking about that, but it's not based on the feelings. And I'll be like, whoa, 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 whoa. But I've got the kids, like, and I feel pulled in so many different directions. And he's just like, get her done.
And you need, and again, I hate the word balance because we all know that, but for lack of a better word, but you need to blend the two,
Yeah.
because I have learned that my blinders, right? So my intuitive blinders are, again, to not, I'm all about, eights are all about justice, what's right. We're a lot of times we're leaders, like you said, we're very direct. It serves us well. I will tell you, as a parent, that can be a lot for your kids.
Oh,
I don't know
yeah.
how your kids, right? So I
Oh,
have two
yeah.
girls, and I look back at, I was the strong mom, I was the doer, I was get this done. But that warm, cozy, nurturing side that you probably excel at is not my default. Not that I don't have it somewhere and I can't be there for my kids, but I was always action oriented. You have a problem, let's fix it. It wasn't like, let's sit in this. It was, well, let's go. And sometimes in relationships, you need that. And I look back, and I say this I very vulnerably, which, because I've learned now to be more aware of that since learning the Enneagram. I wish I had this tool as a mom of young kids or teens and tweens. I didn't learn the Enneagram until my kids were almost grown and flown. But by the time I really connected the dots, my oldest was in college. My youngest, she was in high school, but those formative years were done,
Mhm.
And I look now at, I can almost cringe in certain situations about how I handle things, knowing my personality, knowing their personality, and being like, oh, I would have totally done this differently, because it didn't, it was probably like oil and water. So my advice, right? If you guys take anything away from this conversation, first of all, it's never too late to learn new
Yep.
tools, but this is great for yourself. It's not so that you can fix, it's not so that you can judge, it's not so that you can have an excuse, but it is really just to make yourself aware of how you come across to people. My kids would describe me as being scary and intimidating. And I'm like, I'm not scary and intimidating. I'm just direct. I'm just honest. I'm that friend that people come to when they're tell me the truth. Like, how does this look on me? Do you think this is a smart idea? Like, I'm that honest friend, and I try to do it with kindness and compassion, but they know that I'm authenticity is like a thing for me. And so I'm not going to sugarcoat it. And everybody needs that, but they need it in moderation. And I was always at like a 10, and I probably should have been a 7.
Yeah. And I love that it's never too late. And I also love that about the Enneagram because now you understand yourself and that your growth edge is to lean more into those feelings and the empathy piece. And that's
Mhm.
helped my husband understand the Enneagram too. I also love the wisdom of the Enneagram. That's a really good book where you can
Yep,
look
it is.
at your type and then it tells you like how can you grow. And
Mm-hmm.
um, so you know that about yourself, and we have strengths and we have weaknesses, and that's just the way that we're wired. But it was
Mm-hmm.
funny when you said scary and intimidating because that's how my kids would describe my, my husband. But he's so soft internally. You're probably
Mm-hmm.
like he's this big soft guy inside. So when you get to know him, that's all there. So they'll say he's really not as intimidating as he seems at first. I still have to laugh at that. But this is also super helpful when it comes to our kids and our tweens,
Yes.
teens, like you mentioned. and understanding how they're wired, because they can be wired totally differently than we are. And so it makes it really difficult to understand them and how they organize themselves. And at this age, as you know, tweens and teens, their brains aren't fully developed. They struggle with the prefrontal cortex, which is the executive functioning. So there's a lot going on. And moms will come to me and they will both say, I don't understand why I'm like a hot mess. Like, to your point of your book, we'll talk
Mhm.
about that. I'm a hot mess, and I look at other moms and they're doing it so much better. They just seem so organized. And then they'll talk about their kids and how their kids are so disorganized, and they feel frustrated by how they seem to not be able to pull it together. So I get both of those issues come up a lot.
Mhm.
So how can we navigate through understanding like how we're organized, how our kids are working? What would you say to that whole thing?
I think that's so super common. Again, I always say comparison's the thief of joy. I didn't say it, Teddy Roosevelt said it, but it is there's so much truth in that. And as moms, it is almost instinctual to look at our worst flaws and somebody else is thriving, right? So we see the worst parts of ourselves and we look to other people and go, well, her house is cleaner, or she's, the meal prep queen, or her kids are this, and I feel inferior, right? We take our own weaknesses and like look at somebody else and epitomize them, where the reality of it is they're probably struggling somewhere else. Like I might say, oh, I feel inferior in my career, and I look at somebody else and they have to do, or not have to, but they do take out every night because they can't cook or whatever it is. So it's all, everyone's got their strengths. So the first thing is we have to stop. We have to be intentional about stopping, because we're all wired to sit there and pick ourselves apart. And so we have to just make like an intentional decision that we're not going to do that. I think that it has to start with ourselves first and
Mhm.
foremost.
Mhm.
Second of all, I think it's really hard for people. Organization in general is a learned skill. There are some people, just like some people are naturally athletic or naturally musically inclined, but more often than not, you are taught how to play soccer or basketball. You are taught how to play the piano. Yes, there are people that can come in and just play by ear, but that is not the only way that you can learn. If you take lessons, if you practice, if you have healthy modeled behavior, you learn to do these things. You learn to cook because somebody cooked or you have an interest in it. Organization is no different. And there's somewhere down the road, the messaging got broken, in my opinion, where people thought, I should just know how to do this. And if you grew up in a home where things were disorganized and cluttered and you didn't have systems and your parents held on to things, it is understandable that you will continue that behavior. Now, yes, again, you can be you can be the outlier for sure, but I think we need to give ourselves a little bit of grace that and look at what was my experience like when I would work with people. This is again way before the Enneagram. I would talk to them and say, "Well, tell me a little bit about what was your life like growing up?" Oh, my mom threw everything away. Oh, my mom saved everything. My parents weren't really present. I had to do everything. So I look at that as clues. And when it comes to organization and as moms having to teach our kids and model that behavior, we have to look at what type of behavior are we modeling for our kids first and foremost. And if you don't have those tools, it's next to impossible to expect your kids to have them. And I'm not saying that as a to beat people up. I'm saying that to give yourselves some grace, and maybe you need some help or you both need some help to learn those strategies that maybe were not taught to you. Um so that's the first place. And then again, to your point where everybody has a very unique relationship with clutter. And I say that because clutter is personal. And some people and it's specifically certain Enneagram types, have like a visceral reaction. They see clutter, it stresses them out, it makes them feel anxious, they feel unsettled. As I alluded to earlier, some Enneagram types are a little bit more clutter blind. They're a little bit more, they're able to kind of shut the door or put the blinders on, and it just doesn't bother them. And so understanding that, again, doesn't mean that you have to live in a messy house, and it doesn't mean that you have to live in like a picture perfect house, but it's understanding, okay, why is this triggering me? What is going on? And so setting the expectation of this is how clutter makes us feel is a really good conversation starter for parents. And I'll give you like a practical example, if that's okay.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
when my girls, they're now almost 21 and 24. So they're, I say grown-ish. But when they were younger, I'm this type of person that had to have the dishes washed. I couldn't go to bed with a sink full of dishes. So after dinner, I would make sure all the kitchen was cleaned up before we would like sit down and watch a TV or go do whatever, play a game, whatever we were going to do. And I would explain to them when they were younger that I want to spend time with you. I want to do these things, but it's really important because it stresses me out when we have house is messy, because then it sets the tone. And so the faster we can all do this together, then the more time we'll have. And I did explain that because I wanted them to understand that this is a part of what we do as a family.
Yeah.
And so they had a choice to a degree, right? Like not everything is a choice, but like you want me to spend time with you. This is something that we're going to do, or this is a family. We're all going to pitch in our own participation. But there was a conversation around it. What I find with a lot of my friends who wound up having teenage kids and never had those conversations, the kids just thought a magic wand was waved and the kitchen got cleaned,
Yeah.
or they didn't understand how to prioritize things because it was just never talked about. And again, if you're a parent, you're going, oh, snap, I'm already there. I didn't do it. It's never too late. Like today's a good day to start. But if you have the opportunity to just set some precedent and say, this is why we do these things. It's not about because I want to have a Pinterest perfect kitchen. It's about, I don't want to feel stressed in the morning when I come downstairs and I see all the leftovers from last night. I don't want to feel stressed when I come in after a long day of work and see the breakfast dishes sitting there from the morning when I'm tired. So it's painting a picture that I think that's the piece that gets disconnected for a lot of
Yes.
people. And they
Mhm.
just go, I just can't stand it. And you're yelling at the dishes and you're yelling at the paper. And it's really about what it represents and how it makes you feel.
Oh my gosh, so good. I'm taking notes. What I love about what you're saying is it's also including them that this stresses me out rather than letting it be this battle of, clean up. It's this clutter stresses me out. So you're including them and how it makes you feel, which
Yes.
I think is a really, as you said, it's a missing piece often. And even like one's being perfectionist, this jumped into my brain that I'm imagining, and I don't know, that when you're a perfectionist, it's probably a lot easier to do it yourself than to get your kids involved because you want to do it right.
1,000%, 1,000%.
I imagine.
And it's a slippery slope because one of my best friends is a one, and she said to me, she was like crying to me one day. She's like, I have a 17-year-old that doesn't know how to make his bed because I made his bed forever because it had to be done just so.
Yeah. And understanding if you have a kid that's a perfectionist too, that gets really frustrated if things aren't
Mhm.
a certain way. And also, I was thinking, as a two, I can get really stressed with all the clutter and angry that nobody's helping me. But, it's funny, I've had to learn to take like that frustration and criticism that nobody's helping me and ask for help, which don't like to ask for help. And so it's just interesting, to get everybody involved. That stresses me out to pay attention. How do I feel? And so maybe you have a kid that the clutter doesn't really bother them as much. So what
Mhm.
if it doesn't bother them as much, but it's driving you crazy?
Well, I think there has to be, and this is a really important question. So I'm glad that you asked it. Is there certain, as much as we want to include our kids in the conversation and we want to, you know, allow everyone to have their voice, we are still the parents and there are boundaries that are set. And I think having clear, realistic boundaries for what you will tolerate in your home, in different spaces of your home, is really important. And that might vary depending on the season of life you're in, what your personal situation is. But in our home, in the common areas, when you are done playing with something, so there was a few different kind of like family rules, if you will. So I loved it when my kids were in school. They were not the type to go retreat to their room. They would like to hang downstairs. They would do their homework downstairs. They would do activities, which was great. But they were messy. I mean, they had spread their stuff out, which again is fine. But we would say in the common area at the end of the thing that you're doing, you need to, at the end of the evening, when you're done doing your homework or you're finished with the project for the night, we have to clean it up because we're not leaving everything out on the coffee table or on the dining room table. Like that's just not, we're not going to do that. And they knew that. When they had friends over for a play date, I, from a very early age, incorporated cleanup as part of the play date. So if they had a friend that was getting picked up at 4, at 3:45, I would say, okay, it's time to start cleaning up because we weren't going to leave the playroom messy. And I wanted them to know and their friends to know, hey, like this is part of the process, right? Like this is what we do. We take things out, we put them away. And so we just normalized it in our house that this is what you do. But on the flip side, I would say to my kids, within reason, I would say, it's not great gardens. We're not leaving food for rodents and feral animals to come in. But if you want to be a teenager and you want to have your clothes on the floor, I'm going to shut the door. And if
Yeah.
that means, and I don't mean to sound elitist, but I'm like, we're fortunate enough that we have a cleaning person. But I would say, listen, Dorothy's not here to pick up your dirty clothes. So if your stuff's on the floor, she's not coming in your room. And that's it. And that's your choice. So you can have, if you want to have stuff all over the place in your room within reason, again, we're not going to have it be dirty. I mean, unsafe. But if you want to have messy clothes and just not put your clothes away and get dressed out of a laundry basket, that's on you. I'm not going to stress that because as parents, we have to pick our battles. So I would not pick that battle. It just wasn't, but I said, you are going to make sure that you put your backpack away. You are going to put your stuff in the common area away because that's like Team Palau area, in
Yeah.
your locker room, AKA your bedroom, you want to smell like that's on you. I don't have to go in there. So that's how we handled it in our house. And when I talk to parents who are frustrated, I say, don't try to control every variable. Pick and
Yes.
choose what makes sense for you and what you think is going to allow them to express themselves and have their own, you know, have their own say so
Yes,
within
I think
reason.
that's so good because in the common areas, you're taking care of yourself and having them clean up after themselves. But in their rooms, is that a battle I really want to pick?
I do want to add one other really important piece that is very common for parents. And this is when a lot of times I'll work with kids one-on-one, and I love talking about this, is parents often have a tendency to talk in very broad, general terms. Clean your room in and of itself is way too abstract. And I learned this again through just my own trial and error from working with parents and being very specific in what clean looks like, what a clean room looks like. We want to use words like, you need to pick up your clothes from the floor and put them in your hamper. or I want your dresser to not have 10,000 tchotchkes, or we need to pick up the Legos off the floor. Well, you have teens and tweens, so they're probably, well, they might be playing with Legos, but you know what I mean? Like we want to, I don't want your makeup all over the bathroom. We need to corral it. So being very, very specific of what that means, because so many kids will say, okay, I'm going to shove all my stuff under the bed or in the closet. And they go, it's clean because you can see the floor, but that's not organized. And what are we trying to accomplish? And it's always the so that. I don't want your stuff to go bad. I don't want your makeup to get ruined if you just leave it out on the counter. This is a shared space. We want to make sure that everybody can find what they're looking for. So you want to have this so that this is why the end result, like it's not about the bin. It's not about the basket. It's not about the sake of having a clear counter for sake of having a clear counter. It's about what that provides us. And that's something that, again, going back to your undeveloped prefrontal cortex, these kids don't understand that. They don't know that. And they just know my parents are freaking out or my mom is freaking out that my room's a mess. And so what? Because they don't understand the why behind it. And they oftentimes don't have the tools and the tactical skills of how do I even go about organizing this? And that's where, a professional organizer could come in if you don't have that. Like, how are we going to sort things? How are we going to decide what to keep and what to get rid of? All of those decision-making things.
Being specific. Like, woo! Because it is like clean up your room, and it can be so overwhelming for them if the room is a total mess versus pick up your clothes and put them in the hamper or put away your makeup, like very specific and clear. And then I love and so that, and thinking about taking good care of your things so that it doesn't dry out.
Mm-hmm.
Your makeup so that, whatever. And I love that, so that you can find your stuff more easily in the morning and we're all
Mm-hmm.
downstairs and you're trying to get your sports equipment together.
1,000%. So that I'm not like screaming like a lunatic because we're saying get in the car and you don't have your basketball uniform because you can't find it in the pile of stuff.
Yeah, very helpful. Yeah. So you have a whole Enneagram. Tell them what you have. You have a
Yeah.
course. You have, yeah, tell them.
Yeah. Okay. So in a nutshell, and the first place to start, and I'll give you a link for you to drop in the show notes. I have this like free, I call it my Enneagram cheat sheet. So wherever you are, if you are complete stranger to the Enneagram or you are familiar with it, it's a great place to start. It's a free download. It just gives you an overview of all the 9 types, tells you a brief snapshot of what they are, and can give you some direction. And if you don't know the Enneagram, it can give you some roadmap of how to figure out what your type is. But then from there, if somebody is interested, it was a course. Now we're calling it more of a master class, but either way, it's a digital product that comes with a companion workbook that walks through each of the 9 types, gives a deep dive into what your motivation is, where they struggle, where they thrive, right? I call it their strengths and struggles in general, and then specifically when it relates to clutter and organization. And then we talk about those 3 centers: thinking, feeling, and doing. And so for each one of them, we look at what is the strong center, what is the weak center, and the goal is how do we use them? How do we blend them so that we can make decisions when it comes to organization? So for you, and then there's, like I said, there's a companion workbook that goes with it. It's totally self-paced. You can go through it, and it's a great thing for you to be able to learn not just about yourself, but how to communicate with the people. It's great for parents, I think, because it'll give you language. It'll give you conversation starters that you may not otherwise have in your toolbox to be able to communicate with your kids and to understand, and even your spouse. But like for you as a tool, as a 2, my goal for you would be, your default is going to be feeling, as we identified. I'm going to say, challenge you, say, okay, what are we going to do about this? So we know that you're struggling with, your paper clutter, or, your hidden paper clutter, right? It's not outward paper clutter. So what can we do? Like, cause you're always going to go, this is how I feel, or I feel like this. And I'm even in conversation, you'll use the word feel. So I will challenge you to say, okay, so let's be very specific. What are we going to do? And then that is going to be working a muscle that is not used to being worked. Because for me, if you go, okay, well, how do you feel about that? I'm going to be like, what do you mean? How do I feel about it? I don't feel any way about it. I'm just doing it. So the goal is to try to get people
Mm-hmm.
to be intentional about using that center that they don't normally default to when it comes to clutter, because each of our clutter pitfalls probably have something to do with our weak center. And that's really what we talk about in the course.
Well, this is also like a to-do list and applies to business as
Oh,
well.
1,000%. Well, clutter isn't just limited to your house, and it's not
Yeah.
just limited to papers and laundry and dishes. It's about our time. It's how we spend our resources. It's about, again, I work with other women entrepreneurs, as I'm sure you do too. And it absolutely shows up in so many facets of
Yeah.
our lives and our relationships.
And then do you find with twos that there's a specific motivation that helps them to motivate to get it done?
So, I mean, I think again, not every two looks the same, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
again, and
yes.
just to give people, so the two's motivation is they're helpers by nature. And so the false narrative that twos tell themselves is that their worth is tied to how they can serve and help other people.
Mhm.
That's not to say that other types don't want to help and serve other people, but
It's
the false narrative that the twos tell themselves is my I'm only good for me being able to help you. So I'm always going to put somebody else first because that's the value I bring in the world, which is fake news, like people. So you have to for for you, it might seem selfish to say, you know what, I'm going to spend an hour doing this for the greater good. For twos, they will hold on to things, what I call emotional clutter, because this is a common one I used to get all the time from people. My kids are teenagers, but I still have a high chair and like kids' sippy cups and plates in my kitchen because somebody might come over my house, or I'll have little kids' toys in the garage because what if somebody comes over and they have a little kid and I need to be able to have stuff for them? Well, so you're holding on to clutter not because you're emotionally attached to the sippy cup, or you're emotionally attached to the high chair or the stroller or the whatever, but because you feel that you have to be able to cater to all people at all times. And so, kind of helping you change the narrative that it is not your responsibility for that is the challenge. And once you can have that light bulb moment, then that gives you freedom to be able to make those decisions on your own, as opposed to me coming in there in my very eight personality and going, Cheryl, come on. Your kids are 15 and 17. Why do you need to have a sippy cup? Like, and
yeah.
shitting you for that.
Uh-huh.
It's about saying, let's talk about why you feel the need to have this in the first place, and having that conversation as opposed to browbeating somebody.
And you're getting to the root, because if you just come in and you clean all my clutter out and help me to organize everything, it's not going to stick. And
Correct.
like you say, it's so much more than the bins. And so finding out what our motivation is so that we can grow and be self-aware. Oh, that makes sense about why I'm struggling with this. And I can shift and see this is going to serve me so much better.
Yeah.
And it's actually going to serve others better if I'm doing these things that I need to be doing for myself. So, yeah, very helpful. Very helpful. I'm having all kinds of epiphanies. So tell them, tell them where to find you, because I'm sure that that our listeners are like, oh my gosh, I want to dig into this. I've never heard about this before, and I think it would be so helpful to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is probably the hub for everything, which is simply the letter B, like boy, organized.com. And from there, you can find the book, website, the book, the podcast, the courses, all the things. And like I said, we've got a ton of free resources also for people that are struggling with certain, areas of their home and lives. But this is something that I really feel was a game changer for me when I started incorporating this, when I started gathering this knowledge and just being able to look at clutter a little bit differently, clutter and organization through a different lens, as opposed to what we see on the surface.
You also have coaching, right? Where you
I
train
do.
other organizers.
I do. I do. Yeah. So part of the things that I do is when I shifted my business from being on site with people to doing kind of more speaking and writing and all the things, I know that there's such a need for people to have professional organizers and other experts to be able to support them in the areas where we just don't have those skills. And so I started coaching and mentoring other people who are either looking to build their own organizing business on how to do that. From anything from teaching them kind of my strategy and methodology to just best business practices. How do you become an entrepreneur, especially as I was a figure it out mom entrepreneur with little kids. And I wish that I had had a, a guide, a leader, a roadmap. I just kind of figured it out, but I know that that's intimidating and, a little scary. So I wanted to be that person for people. So I have a lot of people that come to me. They're like, I'm really good at organizing. I enjoy it, but I don't know how to make that into a business. And we have a coaching cohort. I don't know when this is going to go live, but we have one starting in September, and we do coaching and mentoring to really get people in a position where they can go and turn their own gifts and talents into an organizing business.
I love it. I love it. You're doing so many great things to help other people get organized and figure out how to start their own business if they want to, help their kids get organized themselves. So
Yeah.
I love what you're doing, Lori, and I love your whole methodology with this, really getting to the place of understanding ourselves and our why and how we can grow and change. And I love it. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been great.